This is Getting Past Subtitles. I'm Sean Peel,
This is DK Lee.
and welcome to week number 3. Dang, it's actually been 3 weeks already. Holy shit.
Yep.
We not even the Akira series felt like it went this fast.
Well,
We're-
Akira Series is 6
It was like
weeks,
6.
So,
We would be in the midpoint.
yeah.
But we're like almost done. There's only one more week left. Week 3 of our kind of Thai expose series, discovering what they've got, giving a little bit of love to a country that we haven't really watched films too much about in this podcast. Last week we watched Bak, a very kind of classic action film with Tony Jaa, who is up there with the legends. Definitely go see that. Everybody should definitely see that. It's a fun Saturday night movie popcorn, you know. But this week, kind of pivoting directions into something a little more indie, a little more dark comedy, a little bit of everything, kind of romance, but not really. And this is Heart Attack from 2015, directed by, Jesus, how do I say this name? Nawapol Thamrongrattanarit. Oh man, that's rough. that's so rough. This is a long name.
We apologize in advance.
So sorry. So don't even comment or like email about how I butchered that. Like I already know. Yeah. So I think he's a pretty young director. This is not his debut. He's done like a couple other films. I read that they're like pretty experimental, but this was his first kind of like, I guess, Hollywood-ish movie, you know, something that's a little more appropriate for like kind of like the theater experience per se, you know, something for like a broader audience. But as you kind of see and watch it, it still really maintains like an indie kind of route at the same time. Like I could see it being like a gateway to trying to like break in as a rom-com, but it really isn't like a rom-com film. And so, yeah, this movie came out 2015. I just kind of came across it one day, gave it a watch, seemed interesting, and generally I liked it. I remember liking it. I watched it a few years ago, so this was only my second watch with the film. And all in all, I feel like my feelings about the movie have stayed the same from the first time around. Just like I generally liked it. I mean, it's nothing like blow your mind amazing, nor does it feel like refreshing or new in any way, but it is a different kind of movie where again like it kind of like wants to be in the nest of a rom-com, yet the movie itself isn't. It's kind of like a little bit of a dark comedy, but ultimately it's like a character study in a way because it's really all about the main character Yoon, and he's kind of like the cynical guy. And like if you take a step back, like the movie and the plot kind of like pushes you towards like, oh, he meets this girl and he has a crush on this girl and he's like trying to like, unveil his feelings for her, but ultimately like by the end of the movie it's really just about him like, oh, I kind of care more about things than my job, right? So it's a little diversifying in that sense. But for me, like, I liked it in the first place because I think like Yoon and the other characters are interesting. They're pretty like deadpan in their characters and like their dialogue, but I think just like the way that is portrayed is interesting, you know? Like nobody's really over the top, especially for like something that wants to be in the nest of a rom-com. You usually get these very like over the top kind of characters, or like that's when you kind of start going to like cliche rom-com territory, but this movie like does the opposite and you have these just like cynical characters all the way through, and I think that's just like the attraction for me. So that's where I go with it. How about you? This is your first time, right?
Yeah. A lot of it is narration, right? There's a lot of narration that's going on, and we're in his head a lot of times. So I think that kind of adds to that feeling of being his character driven story.
Right.
But like you mentioned, I really enjoyed the interactions between the characters and its subtlety and
Yeah.
how the camera portrayed those things and how they used the camera and showed us certain things and didn't show us other things and
Hmm.
used that in a way to enhance the story. And I really enjoyed that. And I think I really like stories where it's never like black and white within the
Sure.
relationship. And especially for this Yoon and Dr. Im's relationship, like I love the fact that it's so ambiguous and it's teeter tottering between this I like you and doctor
Professionalism.
patient relationship
Right.
and
Right.
all of that mixed together. I love that just because uh, you never really cross that line.
Right.
And even at the end, you like typically in a rom com, you would expect that line to be crossed, right?
Yeah.
But in this movie, you never really cross that line,
Yeah.
and they kind of remain doctor patient actually, which is interesting. And I think that the relationship with him and his friend, I think is how do you say it? Like
Jay. I
the
think it's just
girl
Jay.
Jay, right?
Jay. Yeah.
Yeah, and the relationship that they have with each other, I really like that too,
Right.
and the dynamic that they have. And I think most of the comedic bits kind of happened with him and Jay and him and Kai. So
Yeah.
I think those things really change the dynamics of the film because a lot of times it's a little more serious than a rom-com dictates. And I think
Right.
that using that as a way to kind of alleviate that
Hmm.
and bring in the comedy
Right.
because it's
Yeah.
kind of serious in a lot of the parts of the movies,
It is. It is.
and especially when he like starts going crazy ham working and like gets a heart attack.
Right.
But I think overall the pacing of the film and the overall ambience of the film I really enjoyed, and
Right.
so
Just
yeah, I
like
really
the tonality of it.
I give this film props.
Mm. Yeah, there's a lot that we to dive into there later on too, but yeah, I mean overall like it is a character study film for sure. I mean it really is just all about Yoon between like the story, him, and like even the way that it's shot. It's very like documentary style, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
a lot of it is handheld, and you're literally like a lot of the sequences is literally like following Yoon. Like he goes from
Mm-hmm.
like in a location from scene to scene, like where he goes in the space. Like we're just like following him, like handheld, and it really adds to like it's purely Yoon's story. You know what I mean? And I think
There's
like
definitely a lot of extensive use of tracking shots and
right,
fairly long takes that they
for,
use. And you can tell that they really blocked it out a lot.
for sure.
Especially, there's one shot when Yoon first visits the public hospital
Yep.
and he sees the line and he walks through the whole hospital to go upstairs to get to the end of the line. And it's a really good visualization of how long the line is by
Right.
using that long take.
And just
But,
like his reaction and like how he's kind of like looking for like the line and like finding like where the end point is.
Yeah, and that's a really effective way of using, a long take. But also, it's documentary as you mentioned,
Mm.
in that we're like following him along in this
Yeah.
journey. And I think that kind of adds to what you call like that indie feel
Right.
because of
yeah.
that like just run and gun kind of almost. I mean, it's blocked, but it feels like it's just this handheld like
Right.
like
I mean, it
person
feels
just
low
going
budget
through-
in a way, right?
Yeah.
Like it feels,
which
yeah.
is why I think you mentioned that it felt indie.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's clearly blocked though, so it's like they
100%,
really they really put thought into it.
Yeah, because like not only like with tracking shots, a lot of it too is because like a lot of the sequences are like high stake or like high tension, and like the jazzy music really adds to it and like ramps up in the scene that like there's a lot of pressure. And the camera work too, like it'll go either tracking or it'll be like a close up and like handheld, so there's like camera shake where the camera will just whip pan to like different things that need attention. So like a lot of time it's the clock in the room, right? Like time is a big factor in this film. So a lot of times like you'll have a tracking shot and then like there'll be a whip pan to the clock or like a zoom onto the clock like immediately. So like everything kind of has this real time feel to it. You know what I mean? But not to get too ahead of ourselves. It is my week for this film. So what exactly is Heart Attack? It's a little bit of like Whiplash mixed with like that kind of vibe. You know, I get kind of that feel with this movie. But we follow Yoon, who's the main character, and he's this graphic designer and like Photoshop retoucher in his 30s. And he works as a freelancer, but all he ever does is just focus like all of his time and attention into his work. And basically, he's just a severe workaholic, and you know he has like strong beliefs on not wasting time and that just dedicating all of his time onto work and finishing projects. And really like that shows in his social life and like what he does. Like his only friend is like Jay, really, and then the only time that he eats is at a nearby 7-Eleven. And then there's like Kai, who is like the worker there, and he's kind of his friend. And then there's like another sort of distant friend that there's a scene with the his father passes away, and he's like, should I go to this funeral or not? And so yeah, so basically to maximize his time with finishing like projects and you know being a workaholic, he doesn't even sleep. So he stays awake to days on end, and he kind of calls this his superpower. So he can like stay awake. I mean, he stays awake to like 5 days a week, 6 days a week, and on top of that, he'll basically bring work anywhere with him. So like the first scene that you kind of see, he's in the middle of a project and he's has stayed awake 3 days, and then he goes to it's like some Photoshop thing for a client, and then he finishes it up, and then it goes to review for the other lady, and then they're like in the office with the lady that she's reviewing it, and then she's talking to like I guess her like employee, and she's like basically I don't like it, and the employee goes back to Yoon, and he's like, yeah, can you like finish that today, like redo it? And then he literally redoes the entire project like on the spot, like in the same office, just with like a black blanket over his head. And so you see like things like that happening all the time, where he'll just bring work with him wherever he goes, like this, bringing his huge iMac with him. And so yeah, so like you know he does that, and then like the next project, he finds out that he has like his best friend, or his old best friend anyway. His father like passed away, and that the funeral is coming up the next day. But like the dilemma is that he has a deadline due like that same night, so he ends up going to the funeral, but then working in the funeral hall, like next to the coffin. He plugs in his laptop, and his friend's like, "You didn't have to come if you were busy," kind of like sour about it.
Yeah.
And so this is like his life's dilemma essentially, just staying up multiple days and being a workaholic. So after one day, he starts to develop like this sickness or like an allergy, which basically like these rash spots start developing on the back of his neck, and he goes to a doctor, and he kind of gets prescribed the medicine, and he starts to take the medicine, but one of them is like sleep inducing as a side effect. So he's like he gives it a shot, and he falls asleep, and then wakes himself back up to like finish his work, and he ends up burning it, the medicine anyway, because he doesn't want to sacrifice sleep. Basically, the rash gets work, and his health kind of like severes even harder. And so and the hospital that he went to is like super expensive, and he doesn't have health insurance because he works freelance. So he decides to go to like a public clinic slash dermatologist to see, and that's where he meets Im, who is one of the public nurses there, and she's also kind of like a student in training, you can say. And so basically, he gets assigned to her, and she prescribes him like some medicine as well as like a routine to follow to get better, which includes like exercising and sleeping, of course. And Yoon starts to develop this crush for Im, so he decides to like follow her instructions as a way to like get closer to her. And basically, he struggles to do so. I mean, he signs up for a gym, and he kind of does everything that he asks of her except to sleep. and so his health conditions worsened because of that. And so finally, like in like the second meeting, she's like, "Let's be friends and like let's form a partnership about this, and kind of like get closer to each other while also like helping him as a patient." And so he decides to like, kind of commit to the regimen for her sake. But at the same time, like the biggest dilemma is that he gets this Adidas gig to photo retouch for Adidas as a client. And so he basically kind of is trying to balance out this regimen and staying up to do this job on time. And basically, like, going to sleep on time and doing all this stuff takes away from working. And he ends up losing the Adidas job. And he's like pretty upset about this. So they have like a falling out between him. And because Yoon loses this job with Adidas, he actually ends up losing all of his jobs at the same time shortly afterwards. So now his like calendar is finally free and he's like free of any kind of work. And so that's when he like starts to take like 100% commitment to her regimen, and he actually ends up getting better. And he actually even goes out to like the beach and spends his time doing other things besides work for the first time. And so finally he's like completely healed, and he has like that one last appointment with him, but it kind of like ends on an empty note with him, and he's kind of like falls into like a heartbreak essentially. And he goes to the 7-Eleven with Kai, and Kai is like, "Dude, you're like heartbroken." And he's like, "What should I do about it?" And Kai basically is like, "Well, working helps me get through like a breakup just to get my mind off things." And so he starts taking clients again, and he starts working and essentially like undoes everything that he like got healed for. And he ends up taking this crazy like job from this guy named Peng, who's basically an asshole and like takes advantage of people. And he gives him this assignment that like is supposed to take 2 months to finish, but the deadline is in 2 weeks. So Yoon ends up staying awake for like 12 days straight trying to finish it, and ends up getting like basically has a heart attack and like almost dies in his apartment or wherever. And then once he's hospitalized, it's kind of like an epiphany moment with your life. Like your life flashes before your eyes and stuff like that. And
Yeah.
so he's like basically quits the project and kind of sees that there's more to life outside of work. And the film basically ends with Yoon going back to the clinic because he gets sick again, and meets him and kind of like repatches their relationship as friends. And that's pretty much it. It's kind of how it ends on like a better note than before. Overall, the scenes, I don't know, how do you feel about like the pacing and kind of like from the scene that's seen in the movie? Because in some senses I feel that like it's kind of a long movie. Like it's 2 hours and change, right? And nothing, there are some exciting quote unquote scenes, like namely when he's like working close to a deadline. Pretty much the music is kind of jazzy, and it's like ramps up when there's these high stake scenes. And so those kind of get a bit exciting. But outside of, there's only like maybe 3 4 of those scenes. Outside of that, there are some scenes I feel like they kind of drag to me. Like I'll give an example. There's when he goes to the clinic for the first time, and he gets there at like 6 a.m. and then he has to wait in line. And then there's like 10 minutes of him like waiting, literally, before he can like get an appointment to meet him for the first time. Like I do feel like scenes like that could be chopped thinner to kind of help with the overall pacing of the movie and keep it going faster. Because outside of that, like, the story is kind of like a day in the life sort of thing.
Overall, for me, I didn't mind the pacing. It's interesting because around an hour into the movie, I checked the bar to see how much of the movie there was left.
Yeah.
And there was another like an hour and 10 minutes to go.
It's like, what are they going to do?
I was shocked because it didn't feel like
They could add
I had
more.
an hour left to go. It felt like, I was pretty deep into the movie.
Yeah.
But I guess I was halfway into the movie, but it felt like I was like almost at the end of the movie,
Mm.
but I was halfway there.
I felt the same too.
That wasn't a bad feeling
Mm.
because it didn't, like, as I was watching the first half, it didn't feel like a drag for me. I was
Sure.
interested and engaged in the movie, so I didn't feel like that 1 hour to go felt like, oh,
Like,
I have to watch another
like
hour of
dang.
this. It felt more like, wow, like what are they going to do more? Like how where are we going to go from here?
Right, right.
And so that was an interesting thought, and I don't know what that means about the pacing of the movie exactly, but I think that for me the pacing wasn't all that bad.
Right.
Yeah, it was fun. Like I enjoyed the monthly appointments because it kind of
Sure.
felt like a reward every single time you went to the appointment,
Right, yeah, yeah.
Like everything else was the crap that he had to go through to get to that
Yeah.
appointment because every time
Cuz like
he would make his body worse.
cuz you
or,
want
like,
to
he would
see, like, for me, you want to see like what the relationship is going to end up between Yoon and Im.
exactly
So it's like, and you only get once a month and like one scene to like that interaction. So you're
to
constantly like,
indulge in.
what's he gonna do next? You know, or like, how is this gonna affect that? You know what I mean?
Exactly. So I always felt like that was the reward. And it's kind of interesting because the philosophical message of this movie is kind of like, is work really the most important thing in your life,
Right.
or does it have to be the most important thing in your life? And the way that I'm feeling by wanting to see that moment with the appointment with him and her together, and that, how that relationship blooms,
Yeah.
is a testament to the fact that work really isn't everything.
Yeah,
Like
yeah.
people are more engaged to see what happens within a relationship between two people
Right, right.
rather than whether he gets a job for Adidas or the New York Gallery or whatever it is.
Right, right. Yeah, they're very like independent of each other. Like the scenes between Im and Yoon, and then just the rest of Yoon's life between like, just him and his work, and then even with Jay, like they're just two separate like planes, right? Like they feel like two different storylines in a way.
It's kind of compartmentalized.
Right, right. Yeah, and like to your point too, as the movie progresses, obviously, like work just becomes like less important, even to Yoon. Like in the beginning, it kind of is like a sacrifice of like, if I want to get better, I gotta start, doing some lifestyle changes, and then that just kind of like chips away at his work life. But then once he kind of loses the Adidas job in that area, like even his mentality shifts, and he gives less focus and care to work and kind of starts doing other things. Like his whole thing. I think my favorite scene is when he goes to the beach on New Year's for like the quote unquote vacation. So like in the first, maybe the second scene that Im and Yoon talk, and she's like, "What do you do for fun?" And he's like, "I just work." He's like, "You don't go to the mall or like see a movie or hang out?" And he's like, "What's hanging out?" He's just so baffled by this idea of leisure essentially.
Right.
And then once he loses the Adidas job, during New Year's, and he has like nothing else to do, he goes to the beach, and it's just like these like plain scenes of him like literally doing nothing at the beach. Like there's that shot of him floating in the middle of the ocean, and all you hear is like the narration's like fun, and he's like standing over like this mountain range, and he's like looking out at the scenery, and he like yells out, and he's like entertaining, like he's somehow having like he's enjoying himself, but in a way that is so Yoon, that
Yeah.
it's kind of funny to see.
I mean, all this time he thought of those things as just wasting time,
Right,
right?
right.
It's not anything productive, so it must be wasting time. And so having that kind of mindset going into any of these, activities, it feels like just wasting time. Watching the sunset is wasting time, right?
Right.
It's an interesting balance of like what it means to spend your time wisely. Because in one sense, yeah, like not being productive can be wasting time, quote unquote.
Sure.
But in another sense, like what does it mean to live, right? And that's, I think, the philosophical questions that are like underlying this film is, what does it mean to really enjoy life or
Right.
enjoy the time that you have while you're living? So, But to your point of you talked about how the film's kind of like Whiplash, and I agree. I think that there's many points in this movie where I think even the plot, the beats
Mm-hmm.
of the movie, I feel like it's very inspired by Whiplash, and like the character himself obviously is very inspired. I think
Right.
the guy who wants to make it and who wants to do this job and be the best at his job.
Mm-hmm.
That's really kind of like an archetype that's in this film as well.
Right.
The guy who's like the asshole who like pushes the person is
Yeah,
Peng.
yeah. Like takes advantage of him.
Although Peng is not as much in the forefront in this movie as, let's say, like Whiplash
Right.
and
The professor.
I forget his name, but although he's not as much in the forefront, I think that he's big enough and especially at the end, at the climax, he is the one that's literally pushing him
Yeah, yeah.
to the edge. So yeah, that's another like analogy there and a similarity there that really kind of puts this in the same realm of Whiplash.
Mm-hmm.
The relationship, the love relationship that's there, which is interesting because in this film, that relationship is actually kind of mended, and I think the overall message of this film is different from Whiplash.
Right.
Whereas Whiplash kind of leaves you with a question, I think this film gives you a
Yeah.
subtle answer to what is better,
Right.
quote unquote. Right? The thing is, like, Whiplash tells you that there has to be sacrifice for you to achieve something great. Whereas this film is kind of like
It's almost the opposite.
You don't have to.
You don't have to.
You don't have to be the best at something. You can
Sure.
still enjoy life and love life. You know?
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, it's like, yeah, this movie's kind of just like a message of like broaden your horizon in a way. Like just, kind of look at a big picture and not stay so narrow focused like on work and stuff. And yeah, I mean even to the other characters like I love like Jay is probably my favorite character in the sense that she's kind of like where Yoon needs to be. Like in the end, Yoon and Jay are kind of the same. Yoon's journey is to get to where Jay is in a way, because they have like the same persona, right? Like they're both kind of like cynical about work and like, and that they kind of share the same doing leisure is a waste of time mentality. And this is pretty relevant where I mean like Jay gets married, like she has a boyfriend, and then they get married and she has a baby, and Yoon is constantly like asking her questions about these things what do you find so fun about being in a relationship or like having a baby and like all these things, because like Yoon, I mean not Yoon but Jay's also like it's fun. Like she's just like, I didn't think that I would like it, but I do. Like it's actually nice once you do have it. And then Yoon ends up being kind of the same, where he's first like, nah, but then he goes to the beach and he's like, yeah, that's actually fun. And then he has this crush on this girl and is like, yeah, maybe being in a relationship wouldn't be so bad in that kind of way. And then Jay is like the person that has already experienced all these things. So it's cool seeing like their relationship and how it works out. And then in the end, Jay quits her job too. She stops being his manager, in favor of being like a housewife and like having a child and being married. And she's like, and at the end it's like, it's funny because their relationship is very professional and very like, I'm your manager and then you're kind of like my client, and then like I give you work and then we benefit from both. And that's very like that at first, but then towards the end, especially like once he gets hospitalized and she quits, like you see that they're like actually best friends, and she's like, she even says that they're best friends as well. So it's like kind of digs deeper into that relationship.
Yeah, I agree. There's a lot of things in this film that seem very minor, but I think that tells a deeper kind of message.
Mm.
The relationship between Jay and what's his name? Why am I blanking out on his name?
Yoon.
Yoon, yeah. Like you said, she is kind of the foil for Yoon. She has the same kind of problems, but she takes a different path.
Right.
And Yoon takes a little bit longer to kind of realize what she has already realized. And she tells him these things like being married isn't as bad as I thought, and like it's actually kind of fun, and it takes a lot more work than you think to manage a relationship,
Right, right.
and all of these things that Yoon kind of doesn't understand in the before.
Yeah.
But I think once he gets the heart attack and he has that revelation while his life flashes before his eyes, and he has that vision of his funeral and how he wants his funeral to be, and realizing the little things like not doing the Photoshop for his mom, or like just leaving his best friend hanging, or not being able to see Jay's baby,
Right.
like things like that really makes him feel like he missed out on life more than, man, I didn't get the job that I wanted, or
Yeah.
man, I didn't have that Adidas poster in Shibuya like to my name. Like those things aren't the last things that he thinks about, but it's like the small things that he really didn't think about at all while he's really living, but at the end of his life, or at almost the end of his life, like these are things that flash before his eyes and that matter for him, and that realization only comes to him at the end. And like Jay is basically the foreshadowing of, like you said, where he needs to be,
Right.
and where he should be.
Like, it's important, dude. It's important. Yeah. What do you think about that funeral scene? Like, he hit that table hard for starters.
Yeah.
I was like, ooh, damn.
Yeah, I was like, damn, that must hurt.
I wonder, I wonder how that was done. Like, you just go for it. Like,
No, it's camera work.
can't work. Yeah.
The way that
Get away with it. It's fine. Like, I mean, that second time watching it, it like drags in a way. I was like, the camera really like sits there for a long time, like on the floor, before going into even the funeral scene.
I liked
Yeah,
it.
it's like
I think it gives it the amount of importance in that moment
settling.
where he's about to die. Like it really settles you in place and kind of puts you in a sobering moment where like there's nothing else but this moment of reflection and
Right.
regret, maybe because he might be dying at that moment.
Yeah. And the funeral scene was pretty cool. I liked how they really went for like the whole setup. Like they changed the apartment to like the funeral hall
Yeah.
and like all the chairs. I really just like how it was set up between like, he like lists the names and then the people like walk into frame and take their seat like, through it.
Yeah.
Just it was nice aesthetic. That's the way it was done.
Yeah, I kind of want my funeral to be like that too. Not sad, happy.
Happy. Yeah, he was like, come on, guys. He's like, I don't want you guys to be sad. I want you to be like,
Feel bad.
feel bad. Yeah.
A little bit.
It's just a little, you feel kind of bad for me. Like, what? All right, we'll go with that. For some reason, I was like expecting that scene to happen earlier in the movie. A lot of like the scenes in my mind were jumbled up than like this when I watched it again. I was like, oh, that happens there. Like, oh, this scene happens like later. And that's why it kind of felt
second time
longer to
around?
me in the second run, because I was like, when does that scene happen? Like, if it doesn't happen here, then like just piecing the movie together pacing wise, I was like, oh, okay, so that's how it works out. That's what happens.
Any favorite scene?
I mean, besides the beach one, I don't know. Like I said, I really do like all the scenes with Yoon and Im. Like I said, it's kind of like a treat. I think probably my favorite is when she's like upset because you find out that she's not a good nurse at all, and then
Yeah.
they have like their time together outside of the clinic room, and they're just like having a conversation as friends outside, and she kind of like unveils herself as like, yeah, like I'm not so great, and like it's hard being a nurse, and I kind of get,
Well, she's a doctor.
huh?
She's a doctor.
Yeah, oh yeah. And yeah, I mean, she just like there. That's like the moment to me where their relationship, like, is really shifted to being like friends. Or just like portrayed in a different light outside of the patient and doctor, relationship.
Yeah.
And then she's like eating a sausage, which is so random. Like,
Yeah, I like that moment when the other patient comes out of the room, like, you misdiagnosed my child or whatever.
right.
And I like that moment when Yoon enters the office and you never get to see Im's face.
Mm.
Like, you're always on Yoon, and that moment I think is great, staying on Yoon, because the tension, it really builds the tension in the room.
Sure.
And you're not sure how she's feeling at that moment, because you heard about the misdiagnosis outside and all of that, and you're sure that, you know, she's probably not in a good mood or whatever. And you only hear her voice, and he comes in with the present, right? He's like,
Yeah.
hey, like, I have a present for you. It's for the New Year's, Happy New Year's. And she's like, oh, thanks, like, here, put it here or whatever. And it's only at that moment when he asks her if she's all right that we finally get to see her face.
Mm-hmm.
And I like that little payoff there in that scene,
Right.
where the tension keeps on building and building and building, and until he finally has the courage to ask her if she's all right.
Right.
And really break that patient-doctor boundary and ask her a personal question about how she's feeling.
Right.
And really go into that zone of friendship that you get to see her face. And as the audience, we also get to see the expression on her face to see whether she's all right or not.
Right. Like, it does a great job of making you feel disconnected to him. Like, it's a perfect reflection of, like, the scene itself. Because June himself is like, well, I don't know what to do in this situation, you know? Like, he's trying to kind of, like, connect her in a way, or, like, get her to, like, come out of her shell. But he's, like, awkward about it, and he doesn't really know how to... He just doesn't know how to respond to that situation, you know what I mean? And it's, like, really telling, because the camera is always on him, that you kind of see, like, him dealing with that and, like, that struggle. And it isn't until, like, he finally is able, you know, to ask her, and they have that connection that we just cut to a different scene, and it's like night and day when you see it. You know, to me, it's funny because it feels disconnected in a way. Like, it's kind of jarring when it cuts to that scene, and, like, just the tone of it changes a lot. Like, I honestly probably would have been okay too if, like, the second part of the scene never happened. Like, he just, like, leaves awkwardly and then has to come back a month later and then to, like, reconcile it. But it's an interesting choice that, like, you know, it's a moment for them to kind of get deeper into their relationship, outside of just, like, this patient doctor afterwards.
Yeah. Yeah, I liked it because it's the reward he gets for being courageous.
Right.
And asking her if she's all right, right? So I liked it. It's kind of like the payoff for it.
He couldn't ask her out, but he can say, how are you feeling?
Yeah. Are you all right?
You good, bro?
Okay?
Good. Friend zone for life.
Do you want to go get some 7-Eleven?
Want to go?
Want to get some sausages?
Shrimp dumpling? I like that scene too, when he's like, when he first gets sick and they think it's allergies, and then Jay gives him, he's like, hey, I bought you food, and she leaves, and he opens it up and he's like, I don't know what to do. What if it's my shrimp dumpling? What if I eat it every day? What if I'm allergic to it now? And Kai's like, well, I hear you have to eat more of what you're allergic to get over it. And then they have, like, this whole meta conversation of, do we eat to live, or do we live to eat?
Yeah.
So, I think anything with Kai is fun too. Like, Kai scenes are fun scenes.
They're like the badminton. He's just like, yo, come out, we're gonna play badminton.
It's like, what, now?
In the dead of night, in front of a 7-Eleven.
So strange. He's like, I don't do it left and right like you do. What's up with all this technical, like, mixing Red Bull with coffee? Like, what is happening there?
Not a good idea.
That's disgusting, yo. Which is funny because, like, coffee and Coke is a real thing now. Like, have you seen those in the can?
No, I've seen people do coffee and Red Bull too.
It's so disgusting. It's so, like,
not a good idea though.
It's so detrimental to your fiber, every fiber of your being. And he tells that to In, and she's like, "Are you being serious right now?"
You know I'm a doctor, right?
Doctor In, he's like, "You know I'm a doctor, right?"
Yeah, I also like that scene when the sub doctor comes in, the substitute doctor.
Oh yeah, when he walks in
and he's like texting.
Oh yeah,
he gives the phone to him, and he's like, "Can I respond?" He keeps on texting.
It's like, this isn't an internet cafe. Like, give that back.
Yeah,
It's like robbing of the scene.
Yeah.
And then you like see the two other gifts, and you're like, are those also for her, or are those for him? And you're like, does she have
Mm,
other secret
right.
admirers?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, like, what is your kind of overall thing between their relationship between Yoon and Im? Like, it's were you really rooting for it, or like, what were your hopes and dreams for that? And, like, was it interesting that it kind of leaves off at this more of a friendship than anything?
Well, let me say, in a movie perspective, as a film, I like the fact that they ended where they ended.
Uh huh.
I always like movies when it leaves you wanting more.
Sure.
And this film leaves me wanting more. And that's a feeling that makes me want to watch like a sequel or something of this movie. And I'm like, oh, I want to see their relationship bloom. But the thing about that is, it's never as good as what I imagine,
Right.
which is why I love the fact that they ended it here. You know what I mean?
Right. Right.
Like if I actually see them all lovey-dovey or whatever, or like their relationship bloom into something, I don't think it would be as satisfying as the thought that I have of the imaginations that I have of, their relationship.
Yeah.
Whereas as a character, and for him, yeah, of course I want him to no, I wish them to have happy ending or
Yeah.
have a good relationship with her, but I think that as a film, I think I liked where they ended it.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, like, of course you would want it to happen, but I do like that it, you know, like I said, kind of a lot of the themes and commentary of the movie is pretty subtextual and kind of like happens like small things. And I like how that the fact that they don't get together just kind of helps the overall narrative that it's really just about Yoon in the end and about like, over like living his life versus being a workaholic. And, like that helps between like the most that ever happens between them is being friends, keeping that relationship. Because even before them, like he walks out on like a bad note, and like she thinks that he's never gonna talk to her again. Remends where they left off rather than
Yeah.
anything. So it's kind of like he's preserving what he has. He just goes back to realizing like this friendship matters and like she matters, and the same thing with Jay and everything else in his life. Kind of like so. I like that it re-concretes on that central theme more than anything.
I mean, there's a definite change at the end in the fact that him as a character before the ending, he never had the courage to cross that line or break the boundary
Yeah.
or move forward with a relationship, whether it be friendship or whatever. He just didn't have the courage to go forward with that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Whereas at the end of the movie, I think that he went to the appointment and approached her and said sorry and all that. He's making the effort to be like, yeah, I'm open to this, whatever it may be,
Right.
just a friendship or whatever. Like I'm open to the fact of having somebody and building a relationship, being free from the clutches of just working and just living life whichever way it may take him.
The clutches of no, it's I like that he just finally has like an initiative, like he can get put an initiative in his life rather than
And he can finally say no, right? Even when I hate Peng, like with a passion. He is
Peng.
an asshole, dude. Especially when he
Right.
came to the hospital
He's
and
like,
he's like, "Yo,
I know you're gonna call me a fool,
a
but
douchebag, but you gotta finish the work in 2 days." At that moment, you're just like, dude, you do not know when to butt in, right?
Oh,
like
man.
you need to.
you're the
really...
worst. He like slaps him
that guy.
while he's like dying on the ground to wake him up.
Especially every time when he goes to pick up his check, right? He meets Peng.
Yeah.
And you're just like, why do you have to say stuff like that? Why are you such an asshole? Like,
Yeah, that was like a jerk move when he's like, yeah, I heard you lost the Adidas job and it went to Jang, and you're like, how'd you? Okay, like, go ahead and rub it
what
in.
did you have to say that? Like, did you really have to like rub it in his face?
Go ahead and just put dirt on my name. That's cool.
But it's interesting. I like him as a character. I just hate him as a as a character.
As a character, I like him as a character, but I hate him as a character. You feel me?
Yeah.
You know where I'm going.
For
What?
the movie, he's a great
Yeah.
addition. But
He's the villain we
Oh.
need, but not the one we want.
and I love it because he's so like he's such a side character. Like he just comes out for one scene, becomes an asshole, and leaves.
Yeah.
That's all he does, and it's more than enough for the film.
Yeah. You know what I never noticed my first watch was the taxi helmet guy who's always with Jay,
Oh
Suit
yeah,
Chart. That like
uh-huh.
I don't know if she's like a personal driver or something. But
Yeah. He's always there,
he's
right?
always in the. She's always like, all right, come on, Suit Chart, and then he like gets up out of his phone. Like I watch this again, I go, wait a minute, who is that? Wait, what? Like
Yeah,
I
he's
remember like
always there.
seeing him in one scene, but then he's like in almost every scene that she's in the room.
It's in every scene that she leaves.
That she
the
leaves.
room.
And I'm like he has no relation to anything at all.
Yeah.
He's like the guy that like delivers food, like on the moped bike. That's what he looks like.
Yeah.
They like go to the first meeting and they're all three of them are just standing there sitting there in the chairs. So strange. Yeah, no. I really like Jay a lot. I think some of my favorite scenes is when she asks Yoon to edit her wedding photos. She's like, make it more dreamy. He's like, what, you want like rabbits and stuff in it? And she's like,
And
yeah,
big
just
pink
do
grass.
that. And then you see that he puts like the glow pink filter over the photo. You're like, oh man.
He's like, black and white looks like a funeral picture.
It was funny when he did it because I was like, that's just so like typical. It's such a like a photographer. Hey listeners, if you've tuned into more than one episode, you probably know that me and Lee are quite passionate about Asian movies. We actually got to start because we think that movies are meant to be discussed, and there are so many Asian movies out there to be discussed and to be discovered. Honestly, that goes for just about any international film, if you ask me. I've actually had an interest in podcasting before we launched one and decided to share our discussions and just launch a podcast of our own. Producing this show couldn't have been easier with Anchor. It's a true one-stop shop for literally everything podcasting. Even if you don't have the tech, Anchor is equipped with in-app recording, a music library, editing some segments, cover art. There's just so much flexibility to do. Even better, they help you distribute your podcast to popular platforms, which is why you guys can listen to us via Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, and wherever else you guys are listening. To ice the cake, they even help you monetize your podcast by matching you up with sponsors. You gotta trust me, they literally take care of just about everything. So if you're on the fence, just jump. There's no excuse. Go to anchor.fm or download their app. It's all free to get started today. Yeah, anything else? Anything noteworthy?
I mean, I think that's pretty much it. I really enjoyed this film. There was a lot in the 2 hours that really resonated with me, and it kind of made me want to be in that world. Like that world is like
Sure.
believable, and it's an interesting world, and it makes me want to visit that world. And I think if a film does that for me, I really enjoy it, and it gives me this lingering feeling of wanting more of it.
Right.
So yeah, I really like this film.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot to be left with those characters. They're really fleshed out characters, which is a really good thing and like key thing to do, and sometimes even really hard to do as well. Like you said, it's a very believable world. Like, I mean, it feels like it could happen. Like, that they're among us, and it's like a real life story in a way.
Yeah.
But like, for me, it all comes down to like the characters, and they feel very fleshed out, and they all have, obviously with Yoon, like we follow his life, but even with the relationships that he does have with Jay and in, there's more to them outside of like what we see on screen, which is funny despite like how little we see them relatively in the movie, So yeah, I mean, it's an interesting thing. There's another movie that's this guy did that I always see, and I probably should give it a watch too. I forget what's it called. It came out in 2019. Let me see. Happy Old Year. I always see this around.
One point of note, I think what's pretty interesting about this is the comedy of it. Like for me, watching it, comedy is very not American. Let's just put it at that. It's a very conversational comedy, and I really like that. Where it's kind of like the comedy that you would have with your friend, like while you're talking with your friend, like you would just throw little quips and jokes.
Right, right.
Like the moment when they always like talk about like how he retouches boobs and stuff, and she's like, can you make that
Yeah, she was like, "Can you retouch mine?"
like
He's
the
like, "What?
doctor is
My
like,
boobs."
how many boobs have you like retouched,
Oh, yeah.
and how many boobs have you seen? Like little jokes like that, which are very conversational.
Yeah, one thing that I noticed is, I mean, they're very like grounded in the character. Like when the jokes happen, like what you said, like that is like telling of him, and like that ongoing bit of like, oh, how many pimples have you done? How many boobs have you straightened? And like it's like a common, like it's a reoccurring thing that happens. Like even when he's in the clinic and he's waiting and he's like, I've been here for like 3 hours, and he's like, in that time I could have retouched like 20 of those pimples and like 30
Pimples,
boobs.
yeah.
You know what I mean?
Exactly.
Or like, for me, it's when he goes to the beach and he's like, and he's talking, and before that, he's talking with him and he's like, hanging out, like, that's a waste of time. And she's like, going to the movies. And he's like, no, that's stupid. He's like, why would you watch the sunset? And then, like, in turn, when he actually goes to the beach, and he's like, literally doing exactly what he hates, just floating in the water. And he's like,
Yeah.
this is fun.
I love that little moment with the kid too.
Yeah,
With
yeah.
the floats.
He's like, you have
And
anything
he's
else?
like, don't you have any better designs?
He's like, they all float.
He's-
He's like,
Yeah.
what does it matter? They all float. He's like, but none of them are pretty. It's like,
Which is funny because he is the guy who's really like practical
Exactly.
and just like, let me get it done. But it's just like,
but he's caring about something so dumb.
he's like, is that not a waste of time?
Exactly.
As long as it floats, what does it matter?
What does it matter? But none of these patterns are nice. So yeah, like, they're just all grounded in the character. They're all like telling. It's like it feels natural. I think that's like a really hard thing to do with like comedy is like making it come out feeling natural. Like you said, it happens kind of like in dialogue, or like you have a relationship with that person, and it can be like a joke, or it feels like an insider joke between friends, and those are natural things, and it's kind of hard to do that in a scripted sense.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, I think that's pretty much it. What are we wrapping up the series with, Lee? What is your last pick?
Yeah, so we're gonna end the series off with The Last Life in the Universe. Yeah, I haven't watched this film. Yeah. I really, really appreciate finding a film and being pleasantly surprised by how good it is.
Yeah, you didn't know.
Like
you didn't know
that-
Thailand
that's
had
one
this
of the-
treasure.
That's one of the like wonders of watching film.
Sure.
You know what I mean? Like, because you can never get that experience back. That being pleasantly surprised of seeing a film and being, oh wow, this is a great film, and having that first reaction, and no one spoiling anything, not even a trailer, not even like somebody telling you it's a good film, just like watching it and you're like, wow, this was a good film.
Right.
Like
It's a blind
having
date.
that experience is really, really rare now, because like you have like first trailers, second trailers, final trailers, like
Yeah.
teaser 1, 2, 3. Like you have so many of that.
Spots and like
That like it's so hard for you to go into a film knowing nothing and being pleasantly surprised and using your own judgment to gauge the film the way that you want to.
right.
And this film, I had that experience, so I was really happy. And maybe the film after, the last Life in the Universe, hopefully we'll have the same experience or the opposite experience.
Or the opposite. It's a winner.
This sucks.
It's the downside of that. It's a gamble.
Yeah.
It could be half an hour in, like, no.
But to be honest, that's not a bad experience either. That's also a fun experience too.
Sure, it's a discussion.
Because
It becomes a
you go
discussion.
along, it's because it's a discussion topic. I'm gonna come on this podcast and be like, "That sucked."
you watch a bad movie, and like for me, it's like you watch the bad movie, and then it's almost like you immediately know, at least for the most part. By the time you hit like the first hour, for sure, or like half an hour, like it's bad. And then once you're because we do a podcast, we're forced to like go through the whole thing
talk
through,
about
you
it.
know? So it's like I put extra effort into like having a discussion out of it just so it don't
Yeah.
feel like I wasted 2 hours of my life
Or even
watching a
just
bad
like
movie.
just to calculate and figure out just why it was just so bad, you know?
Right, right. We're trying to make better solutions. We're trying to
So we can learn from it, you know,
yeah,
so we
yeah.
can improve.
Like okay, it was bad. How can you avoid that? Or at least
Mm,
like how could it have been improved if
yeah.
applicable, you know? You know, I think to your point earlier, not to keep going too long, but like finding kind of like hidden gems in the rough, and like how you're saying where comedic moments aren't American at all. Like that's the fun of watching just foreign movies in general, like in Asian films, because they feel new and they feel different and foreign. As like me as an American, and that like too like between dialogue and some jokes that they feel un-American that they just feels like embedded in the culture, and like as a foreign watcher to that, it will always feel fresh and new, and always feel like a new experience and something interesting to like to watch, and like oh yeah, that's something that we never do, but interesting to see like how natural it is, portrayed on screen to them in a way, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
That's something that I find so interesting, and always kind of go back to when watching like either it's a Japanese film or a South Korean piece or something like that. And I think that's too why most people that do like foreign films or foreign drama series or stuff like that is because they just like the difference in culture and like the way that they interact and how they talk and like how just socially how things kind of play out between them, and it's pointed out on screen. So it's always cool.
Agreed.
So this one should be interesting. There's not only Thais, but it's also a Japanese cast. Um, but it's directed by someone who is Thai, right? Yeah.
Hmm.
Although it's kind of older, and this cast is interesting, dude. Takashi Miike is in here. He plays a
Yeah.
yakuza. That's like so fitting. It's hilarious. This should be interesting. It's a mix of cultures, so let's see how this pans out. So we'll see that next week. We'll see you then. Cool. Peace.
Bye bye.